When I'm working as an interpreter, I try to think of the person who really needs me. Why am I there? To help somebody who doesn't understand the source language. Now, for the exercise that we're doing this week here in Tenerife, all I know at this stage is that I'll be interpreting a speech given by a Spanish Republican politician in the 1930s, entitled "Spain has ceased to be a Catholic country," and it's about the separation of church and state. Now, it's difficult to imagine my audience in the 1930s, and in fact I hardly know anyone who can remember the 1930s at all, with the exception of my dad, who happens to be here in Tenerife as well this week on holiday. So I've taken that opportunity to come and have a chat, and when I'm interpreting this politician, I shall think of my dad and I shall be working for him, trying to explain it to him in a way that he will be able to follow. So what do you remember of the 1930s in Britain, and did you hear anything of what was happening in Spain and the Spanish Republic?
Yes, indeed. I can remember quite well because at the time of the Spanish Civil War, I was about 12. I was 13 when it finished. And we were quite aware of what was happening in Europe. We were aware of the fact that the other nations were getting involved in the Spanish Civil War. I and my friends and my brothers were probably romantically affected by the idea that there was an international brigade which was fighting there, which seemed, without knowing who it was or who was in it, that it seemed to be good that there should be an international group acting together. My family were strong supporters of the League of Nations at that time, which is the forerunner of the present international organisation, which seemed to be quite effective, but rather lost its reputation when Italy attacked Abyssinia, and the League of Nations opposed it very strongly, but in fact didn't do anything about it, except just applying some financial restrictions on the Italians. They didn't take any part in it. And from then onwards it became rather ineffective and people didn't take much notice.
But if before the Second World War and before the Spanish Civil War, you heard a Spanish politician outlining an ideology of a secular state and saying we must separate the church from the state, how would you have reacted to that?
Oh, we would have been interested in that because my family was a Catholic family, quite sincere Catholic family, and we looked on Spain as being Catholic. Whether the church should be integral with the state or not is a difficult one. In England, of course, it is the Anglican Church, which is the accepted church, and we as Catholics thought that was a bad thing because we were having to pay for Anglican clergymen and things of that kind. But we didn't really know about what was happening in Spain. But the Catholics weren't all on one side, the British Catholics weren't all on one side or the other.
And would you have had any sympathy for revolutionary left-wing rhetoric?
Yes, very much so. I think we were carried away by left-wing rhetoric. I think that I can remember attending one school debate where I argued that if you were a good Catholic, you would have to be a communist because the two ideologies were so similar. In later years, of course, all that changed, but at that time, that was my attitude towards life.
So I can imagine you could have had a very interesting discussion with the politician in Spain that we're talking about. These are precisely the issues that were being debated in the Spanish Parliament at that time.
Yes, except that I had a schoolboy's attitude towards it. I hadn't any depth of knowledge or real understanding of what it was all about.
Well, it sounds as though the issues are issues that you were concerned with, and the way you've been expressing your views now in English is very useful for me when I come to try to express his ideas in English. One last question. How much Spanish do you understand?
I don't speak any Spanish at all. I can read a little bit of Spanish because I found that I can read bits of most European languages, but I certainly don't speak Spanish and have no knowledge of it as a language.
Señores diputados, se me permitirá que diga unas cuantas palabras acerca de la cuestión religiosa que hoy nos apasiona, con el propósito, dentro de la brevedad de que yo sea capaz, de buscar para las conclusiones del debate lo más eficaz. A mí me parece, señores diputados, que nunca entenderíamos en esta cuestión religiosa si nos empeñásemos en tratarla rigurosamente por su estructura jurídica, si nos empeñásemos en tratarla rigurosamente en construir un molde legal sin conocer bien a fondo lo que vamos a meter dentro. Si perdemos el tiempo en discutir las perfecciones, las imperfecciones del molde legal, sin estar antes seguros de que dentro de él ven todas las realidades políticas españolas que pretendemos someter a su norma. España ha dejado de ser católica. El problema político consiguiente es organizar el Estado en forma tal que quede adecuado a esta fase nueva e histórica del pueblo español. No puedo admitir, señores diputados, que a esto se le llame problema religioso. El auténtico problema religioso no puede exceder los límites de la conciencia personal, porque es la conciencia personal donde se formula y se responde la pregunta sobre el misterio de nuestro destino. Este es un problema político, de constitución del Estado. Y es ahora, precisamente, cuando este problema pierde hasta las semejas de religión, de religiosidad, porque nuestro Estado, a diferencia del Estado antiguo, que tomaba sobre sí la curatela de las conciencias y daba medio impulso a las almas, incluso a su voluntad, el camino de su salvación.
Look after people's consciences for them and save souls, whether those souls wanted to be saved or not.
Quita la Iglesia
But that is no longer the case.
secular que tantos y tan grandes servicios le prestó.
Branch of the church that has
Se trata
served it so
simplemente
well
de
for
organizar
so
el
long
Estado español con
over the
sujeción
centuries
a las
is now to be
premisas
taken
cabo de
from the
establecer.
church, and that means the
Para
state
afirmar
needs to
que
be
España ha dejado de ser
reorganized in the
católica,
light of what I have just
tenemos las
said.
mismas razones, quiero decir, de la misma
I
índole,
can say
que para
that
afirmar que
Spain
España era
has ceased to
católica
be
en
a
los
Catholic
siglos
country in the
XVI
same way
y
that I can
XVII.
unequivocally say that
Sería
Spain
una
was
disputa
a
vana
Catholic
ponernos
country
a
in the
opinar ahora
16th and
qué debe
17th century.
España al catolicismo,
What would
que
be the
suele ser el
point
tema
of talking
favorito de
about
historiadores
what Spain
apologistas.
owes
Yo creo más bien
Catholicism?
que es el
Now, I'll
catolicismo
leave
quien
that
debe a España,
to the
porque una
Catholic
religión
historians.
no
I would
vive en los
rather
textos
ask the
escritos
question,
de
what
los
does
concilios o en
Catholicism
los
owe
infolios
to
de sus
Spain?
teólogos,
Because the identity of a
sino en
country
el
doesn't
espíritu
come
y las
from
obras de los
papal
pueblos que
edicts
la
or
abrazan.
publications of
Y el genio
theologians.
español se derramó por los
The
ámbitos
identity of the
morales
country
del catolicismo.
comes from what
Como su
people
genio
do. And
político
what
se
people
derramó
did in the
por el
past
mundo
was
en las
channeled
empresas que todos conocemos.
through religion, in the same way that the way politicians acted was channeled through the ways that we're all familiar with in this house.
Okay, so now you've heard the interpretation of the speech. Did it sound interesting? Was it?
Yes, it
what
sounded
you expected?
interesting. I don't know that I really comprehended it. I'd need to listen again and think over some of the points which were made, because they were very new to me, some of the things which were being said. But it's a sort of debate which has been held in England about the Anglican Church. Should it continue to be the state church? Should it be disestablished? Catholics think it should, because there's something like 28 Anglican bishops, and they automatically have places in Parliament. There are no Catholic bishops in Parliament, there are no rabbis, there are no Muslim leaders, although, of course, Britain now is a multicultural, multi-religious society. It seems to many people that a quite smallish minority of people who are active Anglicans should be the established church. Now, the problems discussed there are rather different, but they've got a similar background.
So there was a message there that you could make relevant to your own surroundings and your own background.
Yes.
Good, well that's one of the things we aim for at least, and as you say it's a very interesting and could be a very long discussion.
It could, yes. Yes, because there are all sorts of points one can query there.
But unfortunately, we don't have the politician in question still with us to have that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.